Daniel Smith is only criticizing Redford because he's jealous. Let's just say that much. He's just acting like a baby because she didn't get elected, but that's beside the point. Honestly, though, it just seems that those who make you ever notice in our media and in government, those who make decisions that favor the government don't get chastised, but those who make decisions for the people do. That's because our government doesn't care about the people, and especially at the federal level. Redford is trying to do what she can to help the people. I mean, I believe it was last year she increased the AISH amount for low-income people. I commend her on that. You know what? She's trying to give the lower class a leg to stand on, and I commend her for doing that. And unfortunately, again, you can see that our mainstream corporate media caters to government agendas, and they don't want the Canadian public to be informed.
Obviously, I mean, not even just the media, but the general population. I mean, there's been a lot of harsh criticism for protest groups, for people in government making decisions for the people. I mean, honestly, do you believe that some people just aren't ready for the government to actually work for the people instead of for the government?
Well, that partly ties into the fact that, again, the Canadian public is very docile, and that's just not... that's my observations from, interviewing people on the street. That's not just hearsay. That's from talking to a lot of people. And unfortunately, the government representative, I forget who said that, but it was one of the, I think, NDP that said that the Canadian public is not smart enough to make decisions on government agendas that are being put forward. You know what? That's just garbage, in my opinion. It's true to an extent because the Canadian public is very uninformed, but that's because they choose to be and because the government doesn't work for the people. But if the Canadian...
Well, would it be fair to say that maybe the reason that they're uninformed is because the mainstream media that's supposed to be broadcasting the current events is actually not really informing us of what actually is going on?
And that's the whole purpose behind Scandal Crew Media is... to take these agendas that are being put forward and to tell a story that the mainstream media point blank refuses to tell. Not that they can't tell, but they don't want to tell because our paycheck comes from higher up and they're paid to be basically misdirection, essentially, to the Canadian public.
Well, they're paid, obviously they're being paid to tell the story that the corporations want. And I mean, as I said, we touched very heavily on this last week with our discussions with Josh Blakeney from Press TV, who expressed a very similar viewpoint that he, too, agreed that the mainstream media was, and the corporate media, that in itself, the term corporate media illustrates that mainstream media and corporate media are not portraying an agenda that is adherent to the public interest, but rather to the corporate interest, in a sense.
Well, that's just it. You know what? The uninformed society of Canada can be really stacked up to media because, honestly, most of the Canadian public that I've spoken to they spend every night in front of the news, and they spend very little time actually doing research for themselves. And so when you spend all your time, they know that people like their TV, they know that people like their news, and so honestly, when they can get a whole country to sit in front of their TV every night and take in their corporate biased news, guess what? You get a very uninformed society. That's what they want.
More than just an uninformed society, we get a society that believes everything they're told and is not in a position where they start to doubt things they're being told because, oh, well, they heard it on mainstream media and they're programmed to believe that they have credibility through this mainstream media.
Well, that's just it. And thankfully for myself, I have learned that not everything they say is true, and I found that out through various means. But that's the thing, is that they're very, the Canadian public is just that dumbed down and docile. I mean, I don't mean to offend anybody here, but the problem is we believe what we're told. I mean, at
the moment, we only have one listener. They haven't tuned out yet, so obviously we haven't offended too many people.
Well, that's good. But like I say, the Canadian media can basically, literally, tell a story, and it's like handing candy to a baby. We'll just take it at face value without even questioning it. That's just how sad the reality is, that we can be fed a whole bunch of garbage and just take it in like it's truth.
So we're sitting here taking in absolute horse crap, and we believe it. Why? Because it's being fed to us by mainstream corporate media who we believe is credible.
Well, I wish I could broadcast that video that I took of Global to the Canadian public and just show them their attitude. Because point blank, again, that's the attitude of the mainstream media. The story is what we say it is. It doesn't matter if we get our facts right. It doesn't matter if we twist the story 6 ways from Sunday. It's whatever they say it is, and they know the Canadian public is dumb enough just to accept it at face value.
Obviously, like I said, we're straying from the main topic here. I mean, obviously, this does tie into how our leaders are being chastised and how corporate media is being used to the advantage of the opposing parties in order to, sort of demonize and demoralize the values of people who are actually representing the public interest in order to further benefit corporate agendas here. So obviously, it all sort of ties in. But again, why is it that we as the people, somebody who wants to actually exercise their democratic rights and do the right thing, become a politician who creates policy for the people and is supposed to consult people as a politician creating policy? Why is it that these policies are being made without consulting the people?
Well, because, number one, we turned into a government that is not the people of the government. It's the government over the people. That's the motto of this current government. And honestly, they've realized that, you know what, they get a nice fat free paycheck, $18,000 per month, and basically free money just to sit there and debate topics that have no relevance to anybody. And the thing is, you know what, we would see change if salaries of government officials were voted on instead of just being set in standard. That's the first answer, is they're just basically getting their life handed to them. Why should they make decisions for the people? They don't have to. They're guaranteed their life on a silver platter.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously in Norway, this is exactly what's happened, is that government representatives are now at the leisure of the people as far as determining what their value is and what their annual salaries are going to be. And obviously this is a system that is working, so it could essentially be implemented, and it is actually an effective system, allowing the people to have more control over the government versus the government controlling the people. How do we implement that system here in Canada?
Well, I hate to tell you, but it's going to be very hard fought. Honestly, we're literally going to almost have to fight a World War II over this. It's becoming to that point where...
Or maybe a civil war.
Well, it's going to have to become a civil war. You know what? Here's the thing. For all those people out there who say you can protest but just don't get violent, basically, I say I don't believe that's possible. Honestly, here's the problem. You can sit there and say, I'm not going to be violent all you want, but when the police come and suppress you, are you still going to say, officer, can you please quit persecuting me? They're going to say, screw you. So at some point, you can sit there and say, well, I'm going to protest nonviolently. You know what? At some point, you're going to have to get physical at some point.
Well, is it not in the Criminal Code of Canada that if somebody is attacking you, that you do reserve the right to be able to physically defend yourself as long as you are not defending yourself in a means greater than the person attacking you, i.e., you attack me, you break into my home, I defend my home by throwing a couple fists at you, and we get into a good hard fist fight before the cops show up. Legally, it's self-defense, but in a situation where the cops are coming to me, putting a gun to my head and saying, stop protesting, that's considered perfectly legal because, who's going to stop the police from doing this to me? But I don't have the right to hold a gun to their head, or that's considered a criminal offense.
Well, in the United States of America, that's not the case, and we need to start following their example. And actually, in many states in the U.S., it's actually legal to shoot cops. You know what? We need that in Canada. It's time that Canada...
I'm not going to go down that road. I don't want to promote or say that we're promoting or endorsing anything of that nature here. Obviously, we want to be very careful what we're talking about, but...
All I'm saying is that we need the right to defend ourselves. You are exactly right. And you need... if a police officer wants to physically arrest me against my rights, I have the right to defend myself against that, a police officer or not. Well,
no, you don't, because if you defend yourself against their arrest, they're just going to beat the crap out of you and tell you you're resisting. They have a charge for that. It's called resisting arrest.
Yes, but here's where it comes. Yes, it may be resisting arrest, but if their arrest is unlawful and against my rights, and they fail to notify me of my rights, and guess what? That arrest is illegal, and I have the right to refuse that.
Right, but again, as a citizen of this country, knowing that the corporate thugs are out there, or the police as we refer to them now, how do you stand up to them, and who holds them accountable when they unlawfully arrest you? Is there anybody in place that you can go to?
Well, that's the problem. Is there is nobody in place right now because they don't want somebody in place for that. They, again, the corporations want their way. The government wants to favor them, and so they're using the police to enforce their corporate agendas. And unfortunately, even though we may have the right to defend ourselves, that's not how our police see it. And the police, here's the problem with the police. They say, oh, well, they could arrest somebody and beat their head in, and they'll say, oh, I'm just doing my job. Really? Are you just doing your job? I disagree that you're just doing your job, because you know what? There's many jobs out there that aren't violent like that. But I'm sorry, you choose to punch somebody in the head. It's not your job to do that. Your job is to maintain the peace. But at the same time, you have to respect people have rights.
Absolutely, and I mean, it's quite apparent that, oh, well, I'm just doing my job is just nothing more than a mere sales tactic to deter the fact that they are misusing the authority they've been given in the public eye. But again, I mean, we're not here, and the whole topic of police brutality and misuse of police authority in this case is obviously an entirely different topic for another day, which we will be getting to at some point here, folks. So please stay tuned. I mean, we will be having the discussion at some point. But I mean, ultimately, I mean, what it comes down to is we can chastise somebody who's a government official when we don't like the way they're doing it. We are labeled a potential terrorist, a protester, an extremist, an activist, anything and everything that apparently the media has portrayed us as terrible. We criticize our government officials all the time, obviously. And anytime we criticize them, it's becoming more and more frequent that as we voice our concerns and our discontent, that this is somehow being considered unlawful. I mean, where does it end? And why is it that we can criticize government officials, but when they do something right, we criticize them for doing something right?
Well, this all goes back to 9/11, actually. This goes back to what Josh was saying last week. He basically said that 9/11 was a, quote, false flag event, which I agree with. And basically, the United States, the government, it was a self-inflicted wound. They did that to themselves. It had nothing to do with Muslims. And so basically, that whole thing set the stage for this whole terrorism thing. So now, basically, they can use that 9/11 thing as an excuse to basically say, well, we don't agree with what they're doing, so you're a terrorist. Basically, they're using extreme law to basically suppress anyone who disagrees with their viewpoints, and that's where it all goes back to.
So obviously, I mean, we're in a state now where one speaks his mind, and he's subject to the assertion of force of the powers that be in order to suppress their viewpoint. How does anybody get a message across anymore, and how do we stand up against our discontent for what's going on if we're just being called a terrorist and labeled something that isn't necessarily a bad thing?
Well, unfortunately, the way we've come so far, how far we've come, it's disappointing. And at this point, the only way to stop this from happening, in my opinion, we have to boycott the government. We have to stage a coup. And unfortunately, I believe that the only way to end this communism that we're seeing right now is a civil war. I'm sorry, but that's where it's going to end up. Because anybody who protests, as you've seen in Quebec, ends up in handcuffs. And the only way to stop that is a civil outbreak.
Well, I mean, the large population of Canadians to the sort of minuscule number of police and government officials, obviously, I mean, they can't arrest us all and put us all in jail.
Well, that's the thing, is that I don't know.
First of all, they get bored. They wouldn't have anybody to arrest. What would they do?
Well, that's the thing, is that although some people would be arrested, but here's the thing. If the Canadian public came out in droves, in the masses, in the millions, they can't put us all in prison. The average penitentiary, I believe, is 2 or 3 blocks long. I could be wrong, but how many people can you fit in that 3 square blocks? Definitely not millions. And they can only put so many people in there. And you know what? They don't want to put too many people in there because they can't hire enough guards to keep track of them. So you know what? If we come out in droves, we can boycott this government. I tell you, as a Canadian citizen, we have to boycott this government. We have to say we've had enough. And unfortunately, there is no more reasoning with government. There is no more. They're not interested in hearing us. And we have to make them hear us. The only way to do that is to stage a coup. It's going to get violent. I hate to say it, but that's where we're at.
This is obviously what we're leading up to. I mean, and this opens the door for a whole new discussion. I mean, the Harper government building mass amounts of prisons, spending millions of tax dollars on upping defense and building unnecessary, military defenses, especially for the Canadian military, who's in the past has been joked as having, nothing more than a maple syrup gun and a rowboat.